In the late 15th century, the Indian Ocean was a world of secrets, bustling trade routes, and ancient kingdoms from the African coast to India, and the Arabian world's sailors, merchants, and explorers crossed these waters carrying spices, gold, ivory, and stories that shaped civilizations. But to Europe, this world remained distant, unreachable, and full of mystery until one voyage changed history forever. This is the story of Vasco da Gama, the explorer whose journey opened a new age of contact, conflict, and conquest. His arrival on the East African coast, especially Mozambique, set in motion centuries of transformation, diplomacy, and domination. The journey of Vasco da Gama is not only the story of a man, but of nations, empires, and the beginning of European expansion into the Indian Ocean. This documentary explores how one voyage reshaped Africa, Asia, and the world. Before the arrival of the Portuguese, the East African coast was a thriving region of commerce and culture stretching from Mogadishu to Sofala. This coast was known as the Swahili corridor, a network of independent city-states including Mombasa, Kilwa, Mozambique Island, and Sofala, each ruled by sultans and guided by centuries of trade. The Swahili people blended African, Arab, Persian, and Indian influences, creating a unique maritime civilization. Dhows with triangular sails crisscrossed the waters carrying spices from India, cloth from Gujarat, porcelain from China, and gold from the Zambezi Valley. Islam spread through the region as merchants built mosques, schools, and ports. The economy flourished, and diplomacy linked African rulers with Arab traders and Asian markets. Meanwhile, in Europe, Portugal was rising under the vision of Prince Henry the Navigator. The Portuguese sought a sea route to India, dreaming of bypassing Arab and Ottoman intermediaries. They hoped to control the spice trade that enriched Asia and the Middle East more than Europe. By the late 1400s, Portuguese ships had reached the Congo, the Angolan coast, and the southern tip of Africa. The stage was set for a decisive moment in world history. In 1497, King Manuel I entrusted Vasco da Gama with a mission that seemed impossible: sail from Portugal around Africa and reach India by sea. He commanded for ships and a crew determined to achieve what no European had done before. Vasco da Gama set sail from Lisbon in July 1497, navigating the Atlantic southward. The fleet followed the winds of the Cape Verde Islands, then crossed unknown waters toward the southern oceans. After months of storms, hunger, and sickness, they rounded the feared Cape of Good Hope, where many ships before had failed. This success marked a turning point. The Portuguese were entering the Indian Ocean. In early 1498, they reached Mozambique Island, the gateway to the Swahili coast. This was Vasco da Gama's first major contact with an African Islamic kingdom. The island was a thriving port, ruled by a sultan who controlled trade routes. From the interior, merchants dealt in gold from the mines of Manica and Sofala, ivory from the forests, and beads, carpets, and spices brought from Asia. The city was built with coral stone mosques, and elegant houses a center of power and cultural sophistication. When the Portuguese arrived, they pretended to be Muslim traders, hoping to gain safe passage. The Sultan welcomed them at first, offering pilots and supplies, but soon suspicion rose. The Portuguese had different customs, their prayers were unfamiliar, and their intentions unclear. Vasco da Gama demanded more than what diplomacy offered. He sought dominance, control, and fear. The relationship deteriorated quickly. As tensions grew, da Gama forced pilots onto his ships, threatened local leaders, and fired cannons to intimidate the population. This moment marked the first spark in a long future of conflict, conquest, and colonial ambition between Portugal and East Africa. After leaving Mozambique Island, Vasco da Gama sailed north to Mombasa and then Malindi, cities with rivalries between themselves. Malindi welcomed the Portuguese, hoping to gain an advantage over Mombasa. The Sultan of Malindi provided an experienced Arab pilot, often believed to be Ahmad ibn Majid, or one from his school of navigation. This pilot guided da Gama across the Indian Ocean to Calicut in India, completing the legendary voyage in Calicut. Vasco da Gama expected glory and riches, but faced resistance. The Indian Ocean trade network had long been dominated by Arab Gujarati and Swahili merchants. The Portuguese were outsiders, unfamiliar and untrusted. The Zamorin ruler of Calicut refused to grant the privileges da Gama demanded. Frustrated by the diplomacy, he resorted again to violence, threatening local traders and seizing goods. The seeds of future conflict were planted when da Gama returned to Africa. On his homeward journey, he carried a new objective. Portugal would not simply trade, it would conquer, dominate, and control the Indian Ocean. The East African coast, especially Mozambique, became crucial. The Portuguese needed harbors, supply points, and strongholds to secure their route to India. They saw Mozambique Island and Sofala as perfect bases for their empire. Over the next decades, Portuguese fleets returned to enforce this vision. Unlike the Swahili rulers, who governed through negotiation and alliances, the Portuguese imposed military strength, fortresses, taxes, and authority by force. The early peaceful maritime world was being reshaped forever. By the early 16th century, the Portuguese launched full campaigns across the East African coast. They attacked Kilwa, bombarded Mombasa, and imposed their rule on strategic ports. In 1507, they occupied Mozambique Island, building Fort São Sebastião, one of the largest European fortresses. In Africa, this fortress became the center of Portuguese power in the region. The Swahili cities resisted the foreign domination. Some fled inland, others formed alliances to push back against the invaders, yet the Portuguese used superior naval firepower, forcing many ports to accept their authority. The old trade networks were disrupted. Arab merchants lost influence, and the Portuguese claimed control over gold, ivory, and maritime taxes. The conquest changed life across Mozambique. Local rulers were replaced by Portuguese captains. Settlers and missionaries. The economy was redirected toward Portuguese interests. The slave trade intensified. Fishing, agriculture, and gold extraction were reorganized under colonial control. The blending of cultures deepened as new communities emerged, but inequality and exploitation grew. Despite these hardships, the Swahili culture survived. Their language, architecture, and traditions remained strong, resisting complete assimilation. The people of Mozambique preserved their identity, adapting while enduring Portuguese rule for centuries. The struggle between local autonomy and imperial domination shaped the history of the region. Vasco da Gama's voyage changed the world. It opened the sea route to India, allowing Portugal to build a vast oceanic empire stretching from Lisbon to Brazil, Angola, Mozambique, India, and beyond. But it also brought disruption, violence, and exploitation to the lands he encountered. The Indian Ocean world shifted from a place of shared trade to a battlefield of European competition and control. In Mozambique, the Portuguese presence lasted nearly 500 years. Their rule reshaped cities, religion, trade, and society, but it also sparked waves of resistance, rebellion, and longing for freedom. Centuries later, these struggles contributed to the rise of nationalist movements such as Frelimo, that eventually led Mozambique to independence in 1975. Today, the story of Vasco da Gama remains complex, celebrated in Europe as a hero and explorer, yet remembered in Africa and Asia as a symbol of conquest and colonization. His legacy is not one narrative, but many reflecting different voices and experiences. As we look across the shores of Mozambique, the forts, the mosques, the ancient ports, and the vibrant Swahili culture remind us of the long journey from early trade to European conquest, and finally to independence. The history shaped by Vasco da Gama continues to echo through time, teaching us about power, connection, resistance, and the enduring spirit of the people who lived through it.